On tonight's episode, we will be reading stories out of order. We're going to read the prequel first, then the main line, and then the sequel. It should all still make sense. I hope you enjoy. The first of this trilogy is called Sleepy Mall. We will be reading one of three per episode because they are so long. There will be a complete version after all three are finished. I just wanted you all to know that. I'm writing the story in response to another one that has recently made its way onto the internet, called Dead Mall. As unbelievable as it sounds, I think that it likely happened, but I don't know where Mike and Gina are. And I'm not sure if I can provide many answers to what transpired at Sleepy Mall in 2013. What I do have is my own first-hand experience from when the mall was still open and fairly busy. Past its prime, sure, but still functional as a place to shop and be with friends. Right off the bat, I should mention that some of my memories around these events may be unreliable. I do a very good long-term memory recall. Normally I can remember things that happened when I was just 2 years old. However, these memories were buried and forgotten until recently. I think that I should start by talking about how I remember the mall itself. For a long time, I hadn't at all, not really. I only had a vague childhood images with a fog of confusion existing in a place where I couldn't be sure if I was misremembering a dream or something real. I always knew that I had visited it multiple times as a kid. We had pictures to prove it. I think I even have a few toys and clothes as a keepsake that we must have bought there. But until I read about Mike and Gina's exploration of the mall's dying husk, I couldn't recall anything truly solid about my visit. Like memories were always hiding just above a dark storm cloud. I had partially blocked out of my history with this place, because something traumatic happened to me there, and it would have defined my childhood and growth had it been allowed to actively circle around in my mind during those crucial years. I'd start with how innocent my own journey to the past began. The modern classic movie Home Alone had a mall scene. I mean, it did, right? Even now, I can't let go of the belief that such a scene exists. Before I take a detour into cursed lost media territory, I'll explain. I first saw the movie in November 1990, though I still didn't have many clear memories of the showing, even after my mental floodgates were opened. I know I went to the sequel when it arrived as well, but I only ever saw either movie, in parts on TV for several years after that, as they steadily ingrained themselves as an American holiday movie staples. I think I was 12 when I finally watched it fully and on videotape. We rented for a family Christmas get-together. At an age when it's easier to remember and understand personal history and the world around you, the fuzzy uncertainty of all things that we have when we're younger goes away. So I can clearly recollect asking my parents about the mall scene. What? My mom replies. Right around the time the bandits start getting tortured by a psycho kid. Honey, there is no mall scene. I couldn't accept that. I remember seeing it when we all first went to the film together at the mall in 1990. It was probably the only part of the movie I could remember pretty well, from the viewing in the dark, crowded theater as the credits rolled. This time in a living room with a roaring fireplace, I was perplexed. My brother and sister called me dumb for getting something wrong about what was clearly one of the most important hallmarks in cinema. Obviously they would, being annoying teenagers. Years later, when the DVD came out, I eventually rented the movie once again and watched the deleted scenes, including any extras. Certainly, I'd vindicate myself. My thumb was on my old flip phone's digits, itching to call up my sister, who was in college at that point, just so I could rub it in her face. But the scene never showed up, and for some reason this persistently bothered me much more than it should have. I even talked to my parents about it and asked them to think really hard about the day we saw it back at Sleepy Pines. Had we seen a rare cut of the film, or was I just losing my mind? The thing is, there was a point in this conversation where they both kind of looked at each other, clearly worried just for a second. Then they assured me I was probably thinking of another scene, and my young mind back then got it mixed up with other movies, or the experience of seeing it at the mall to begin with. To be fair, there's a part of the movie where Kevin, while on his own, goes to the store and acts like a grown-up to buy some essentials, but it's not at all like what I've seen in my head, which was way more elaborate and features his entire family. I'd always figured that the segment took place before the infamous pizza dinner that gets Kevin sent to the attic. Kevin has been dragged out to the mall for some last-minute holiday shopping where his siblings, cousins, get all the attention. His mom forgets her credit card, so the dad has to pay for everything. The parents are out of character, acting agitated and impatient, and they end up frightening Kevin, almost as much as childhood nightmare fuel basement furnace. At some point, Kevin stops and looks into a dark hallway. It's some part of the mall that everyone seems to ignore, and the camera tricks make it look much more ominous than it should be. The unlit corridor becomes one more thing in the movie that scares Kevin's young mind, and that's it. I was never sure how long this shopping scene lasted. I can't recall how it ended. The deleted scene that I suppose really doesn't exist is important to my own story, and how I once perceived what I experienced that day as I grew up. Seeing as how I'm telling a story that deserves a proper build-up, I'll start at the beginning. I don't expect everyone to believe that these things really happened, but at least writing all this down may help me finally move on. It was November, just before Thanksgiving and Black Friday. Well, not quite as big as 1990, but it got to be later on. The shopping weekend was still the annual main event for business back then. The malls across America were ground zero. My parents couldn't stand those sorts of crowds, so our visit to the Sleepy Pines that year happened a couple days before turkey was served. I grew up in Ohio, not the American Northwest where malls existed, but many of my grandparents and aunts and uncles lived there, so I was used to taking road trips with my family several times a year. This time we were spending Thanksgiving weekend with my dad's brother, his wife, and their two kids. My cousins were both a bit older than me and my siblings, the girl being 15 and the boy 17. They were fun to hang out with when I was younger, but then they were jagged teenagers, too cool to acknowledge me. Similarly, my siblings were also separate by 2 years. My sister was the oldest of us at 13, and as my clothes were mostly her hand-me-downs, I typically showed up in our family photos from those years in t-shirts with outdated 80s cartoon characters. Staring at the camera, she usually just ignored me, or at most called me annoying. Meanwhile, my brother, 11 and 9, often worked together to plot up new ways to tease or prank me. I was 8, but still the baby. My parents dotted on me when they could, but were so busy with other troublemakers that they had little time to give me guidance or structure in those days before my siblings started to head off to college. So I often felt like I was given free rein and could get away with anything. But that also meant that if I got myself into trouble, I usually have to get myself out. I think the early independence toughened me up at least a bit more than most kids of that age. Still, most everyone cries the first time they scrape their knee, and the pain and fear aren't so bad with each new injury. I could be as terrified by an unfamiliar experience as any kid. I'd get over it and be able to face those scary moments head on should they happen again. I like to put on a brave face against adversity, and that gradually helped me get my brothers off my back once they realized that I wasn't going to be the butt of their jokes anymore. There are some things, though, that you simply can't get over, and you either have to have the fortune to learn to forget, or you're haunted, and maybe change for the worse. Thankfully, I did forget, and for a long time, while it mattered most, as an adult who has gone through other hardships over the years, I can better weather suddenly remembering the trauma that is separated by such time and distance. I now reside in Hawaii with my boyfriend. I have a good life and supportive friends, so don't worry about me. I only wish it were possible to go back in time and tell my 7-year-old self that everything would be okay that night. Somehow I survived it. Though my resurfaced memories are spotty, so I may never be certain of every detail, I'll do my best to fill in the gaps. Shortly after we arrived at my uncle's house, on a chilly afternoon dotted with snow flurries, all 7 of us kids piled into my parents' minivan. Being the youngest, I was already used to sitting in the back row, but not so much being squished in the middle seat between my sister and cousin. For an hour-long drive in a vehicle with barely working heat, it sucked. Nothing starts a big family visit/shopping day like being thoughtlessly crammed among kids that were all older than you. It feels like you didn't exist. But Sleepy Pines on the outside of the holiday was a sight for my young eyes. The parking lot was nearly full despite my parents' effort to beat the rush. The mall was packed with shoppers carrying bags full of presents, and the ceiling walls and storefronts were decorated immaculately for the season with ribbons and giant candy canes, and the atrium by the fountain and mural was the mall centerpiece for the month. A big Christmas tree that nearly reached the skylight, covered in more ornaments than my entire extended family would ever own. To think there was a time when most malls in America looked so gorgeous towards the end of the year. Time lasts longer when you're young, so to me it must have felt like we had been shopping for 8 hours, but it was probably closer to half that. We went into a dozen clothing stores along with a couple shoe stores and bookstores. I know a few places were closed up, but like I said, the mall must have still been profitable back then. All this shopping was boring for me and my brothers, but my cousins and sisters loved it all, and made the three of us wait a while they tried new threads. None of us had these new things called Game Boys yet, so we were stuck with coloring books and small 8-color crowns boxes for our entertainment, while the teenagers had their fashion fun. Once the four adults finally noticed how bored some of us were, we got to visit KB Toys for a whole 10 minutes. Being happy kids our age and getting to see all the shiny toys we wanted for Christmas recharged me and my brother's spirits, at least until the teens started complaining that we were going to run out of time to check out the rest of the important stores. What with a movie coming up, the parents wanted everyone to stick together all day, too, so it wasn't like we could split up. With one group doing monotonous clothes stuff and the rest of us were spending the time at the Toy Story or arcade. When you get bored from an unending tedium as a youngster, your mind starts wandering and you look for anything at all that might stimulate that need for new information. You might start to notice things you normally wouldn't notice, like how surprisingly clean a malt might be. Exquisitely so, in fact. No, seriously. Spend enough time on the floor filling in other people's drawings with colored wax, and you will learn to respect cleanness of a carpet. Small details, the lack of stains in the store carpet or flawless wood floors, was always one of those random childhood memories of the place that stuck with me. Even the pillars and the tiles out in the mall space were perfection. All polished and shiny, it was unusual enough to stand out in my mind, and that kind of eye for effort for spotlessness in what just would be another middling customer marketplace in rural America, you wouldn't expect such detailed workmanship in any building that didn't already have gold leafing on everything. Yet somehow I only ever saw one custodian during the whole long visit. Yes, places have cleaning crews that work at night, but this guy somehow struck me as someone who did everything on his own. Sleepy Pines was the old man's second home, his pride and joy. I just didn't know how he would have done it, even if he worked there 24/7. I must have spotted him walking around 4 or 5 times over the course of the day, trying his best to sink into the background in his beige uniform. I repeatedly saw him picking up trash on the floor, and he took his angry scowl in each instance that made him look scary. As people passed and ignored him, he seemed like he was cursing the world and the filth they left behind. There was something else I noticed. There were security cameras all over the place, and this was in 1990, when they were often less ambiguous and hiding inside ceiling-mounted domes, so they were easily visible despite being mounted high up. I didn't feel like the shoppers paid them any attention or cared at all. Maybe all of the posted "smile, you're being recorded" signs put them at ease, like this level of security was normal. But like the custodian, I only ever saw a single patrolling security officer. It was as if they considered their CCTV system enough to keep this place safe and ward off shoplifting. I can remember my younger self thinking that the worst stop of the day was Dillard's, one of the mall's two anchors, and a huge department store full of clothes and more. My sister, mom, and aunt and cousins must have tried half the outfits in there. Meanwhile, the rest of us wandered about the store, and at some point I caught my dad and uncle staring off into space as they were contemplating on the chain of events that had led them to spending at least an hour there. The memory that sticks out the most was our visit to a perfume section where one of them remembered that their wife wanted some expensive fragrance for Christmas. I never forgotten how the smell there was so intense my brothers gagged, or that I had a coughing fit which lasted a while. Oh, and now that I've been writing this and thinking about the nefarious perfume lady in the dead mall story, I can suddenly see her. And her smiling in my mind, along with something else that probably traumatized me. As my dad, uncle, and brothers were all too manly to sample the perfume, I got to be the guinea pig. That large lady must have dropped half a dozen smelly liquids on my wrist before the big, strong men finally picked one. I'm sure my brothers just loved that. The planned last stop of the day was before seeing Home Alone was back at the atrium by the fountains. Santa's chair was set up, but he wasn't around yet. I'm guessing not until December, so I didn't get to sit in his lap and ask for something basic like my own new clothes. But there was one thing I got to finally do as a reward for being so patient all day. I got to ride the holiday train ride. For those too young to remember something that might still exist at some malls, but were once more prolific, there used to be miniature trains that ran on small looping tracks throughout the Fox Winter Wonderland. There was a long line and movies were starting soon. I think we already had the tickets, but I could tell that everyone else was anxious about getting on in time and finding a good seat. This wasn't helped by the fact my brothers were too old to go on the train and got irritated because they had to wait on me, even though the younger two could have gone on it. I vividly recall that at the time he always insisted on acting grown up, as his big bro wouldn't have ridden it out of principle, and knowing how I was back then, I must have felt guilty about it, like I was doing something selfish. There was one thing about the mall that really creeped me out. Did so when I visited the first few times, but there was one thing about the mall that really creeped me out. It did so when I visited the first few times when I was very young, and still does when I think back on it. The mural in the atrium by the fountain of the settlers and the natives and the dark woods that once covered the area. Most people didn't seem to mind the artwork or pay much attention to it, but there was something about it. The people depicted on those tiles, their flat expressions, and their eyes that stared off into nothing, the nighttime trees behind them, which did look like they were made by another artist, didn't bother me as much. I've heard and read about other experiences that mention the subtle brushwork in the background depicting mythical and real forest creatures just waiting to be found by astute observers, but I never got close enough to search for it myself. I did have plenty of time to bask in the figures' gazes while in line for the train, though, and those eyes were unnerving me by the time I got to the boarding area. To make matters worse, which was the theme of the day, our parents forced my brothers to stand in line with me. Even though they weren't writing, it made them even more agitated. And when they got like that, I became the outlet. They weren't always mean back then, and we have a good relationship as adults, but when they have a bad time, they were experts at making me have a bad time too. Teasing, pranking, mocking my age and height, a general ragging. Anyone with older siblings can relate, I'm sure. Typical stuff, and I wouldn't bother mentioning it if their behavior wasn't important later on. At least I did get to ride the train, but only for a few minutes or so. Afterwards, we rejoined the rest of the family after they had moved their purchases to their cars outside while I was in line. We then rushed to the small movie theater, grabbed some snacks, and because we showed up just as the film was starting, it was crowded. We had to settle for seats in the back row. My brother blamed me for that too, and they conspired with my sister and cousin to get me peeved as well. I would never tattle or whine to mom and dad about petty things like that, nor did I fight back as much. Instead, I suffered in silence. I didn't let myself cry either, but it did still hurt to get gaslit into thinking that you're the one to blame for everything. I wasn't the one I wasn't the one in charge of organizing an overstuffed and exhausting shopping extravaganza. The movie provided a distraction from all that. Though I could relate to poor Kevin being picked on and forgotten, but the idea of getting a chance to take things out on a pair of burglars via elaborate traps was nothing more than a cathartic fantasy. The rest of the family probably didn't see the similarities to them. It was just a comedic holiday film. It was just annoying that I had to get a whiff of those stinky perfumes every time I took a bite of popcorn. Afterwards, we had dinner in the food court. As a long day came to an end, all of us kids and teenagers were more than ready to go home. But Mom suddenly needed just one more thing. With a few minutes until the mall closed at 7, we had to make a final stop because she remembered we needed a new vacuum cleaner to replace the broken one. I lived with my immediate family in a rural area that was far from any department store, so squeezing in such a purchase made sense, even if it made the younger ones more irritable. With all of our many other purchases already sitting out in the freezing parking lot, we made a mad dash to Sleepy Pines, only other anchor store. I'm still not sure just how many parents managed to fit their new vacuums into the van with everyone else. They must have taken care of all their holiday shopping in one day. It turned out that the other kid really didn't like this last minute decision. My sister and cousins didn't always make me into their plaything, stress ball or punch pillow, but when pushed far enough, they'd get in on the action too. After their pleas to get home fell on deaf ears, meaning that TV shows would be missed and nightly calls to high school boyfriends would be delayed, they turned their eyes on to me for entertainment, right in the middle of Sears. I quickly reached my limit on putting up with their crap and got plenty upset. The adults were too busy trying to buy an appliance just before the mall closed to pay any attention to us. Again, I do have a good relationship with my cousins and siblings. In the present, I swear, even bad children can turn into good adults. It's just important for the purpose of the story that I mention the ridicule I experienced. Though, to be honest, it does feel great to call them out after all these years, and to subtly blame them for everything that happened next. You see, I did stupid things as a kid too. Inexplicable things at times. That's what happens when you're young and lack critical thinking skills, and the idea of consequences is still very hard to grasp. I was coming from a place of logic when I did it, but that didn't make it even or close to the right decision. To try and get away from their bullying, I had been walking around the nearly empty Sears store at a faster and faster pace. The others kept up, and it only turned into more of a game for them. Then an opportune moment arrived when my dad and uncle started calling for everyone to come back. Not because mom was ready to make the final purchase and free us, but rather parents just didn't like to see their kids out of sight for too long. But I knew it was only a matter of seconds before my tormentors wandered off again from the vacuum cleaner aisle to renew the pursuit. So instead of going to the adults with them, I turned around, ran into the major appliance corner of the store, and crawled into a washing machine. Yeah, not my brightest moment, but you couldn't beat it as a hiding place. Back then, they didn't have the safety features we take for granted now. So easy to close the door from the inside. So there I was, hunkered down in a pitch black tumbler, more scared of my family than my hideout. I thought about getting out within the first minute, but then I heard someone walking past and figured it might have been an older kid. I stayed in there, and I must have lost track of time. To be fair, it was the first bit of true peace and quiet I had known all day. According to old memories of this incident that I never used to question, the next thing I knew I had gotten out, wandering about the empty Sears for a bit, and was then helped out of the store by some cops and returned to my parents, amid the flashing lights of the police cruiser. But I never had a firm grasp on the passage of time around the event, and now I remember why. Much more actually happened. First, I should note in a particular observation which never left me about the end of the day. During the last 15 minutes or so before 7 o'clock closing time, I had noticed the behavior out in the rest of the mall from the Sears entrance. Employees were closing up their shops in a hurry and rushing customers out. The owners and workers I could see looked like they were being directed by general mall staff to hurry things along. The custodian and head of security guys being among them. This also happened much closer to me. Moments later in the department store, just before my siblings and cousins started being mean, there was a conversation between my parents and/or aunt and uncle, with the employee helping them pick a vacuum cleaner. That's always stuck out to me for some reason. And it went something like this. "I'm very sorry, but we're going to have to make this quick." A parent asked, "What's the rush? We know it closed at 7, but..." "Yes, but this evening we need to be out of the store within just a few minutes after closing." "Has it always been like that?" my uncle or aunt replied. "We've been here before, and we've never seen them all like this, with shoppers being hurried out if customers need a few extra minutes to finish up." Further discussion must have seemed like a waste of time to the worried sales associate, and he said something like, "It's like this once a year. We can get in a lot of trouble if we linger around tonight." I remember him looking away as he revealed this, or seeing guilt on his face, like this wasn't something he was supposed to say to a customer. It was odd, but seeing as how this was also the first time I'd ever been at a mall around closing time, I probably just figured that this was the way things were. But later on, as a teenager in the 90s, I hung out at malls more often with friends. It usually was a pretty lax affair as things closed down. You usually just finished whatever you were doing and left as the stores rolled down their shutters. Things got quiet, lights turned off, and the place emptied out. My parents didn't dwell on it for long because it was easy to come up with a reason that explained the rush and shrugged off the urgency. I think my mom who replied, "Must it be because of the holiday weekend?" "Of course." "Well then, I'll just have to make a choice quickly." I didn't get to see which vacuum cleaner she chose until I was safely back home. Yes, obviously I did survive that night, but it shouldn't have been that night where that was ever in question. And now that the memories have come back to me, I've only begun to wonder about the scars it left behind. I think a part of my subconscious has been haunted by what I experienced, even while the rest of me managed to forget for the longest time. Mom sometimes says I was different before the night I got left in the mall. My family belief happened would have just been enough to traumatize any kid that young. But the truth is just so far beyond what they know. I've delayed writing out what transpired long enough, and there's nothing left to set up in the story. Revisiting and really processing everything has given me the time to shake these past few weeks. So I might have some sort of PTS thing going on, but I'm going to try. I don't expect you to believe the second part of the story, and that's fine. Maybe if one person does, and they're the right person, I could finally get some answers, but I doubt they exist. When I snapped out of whatever state of mind I was in, and left the washing machine, I stepped into a very dark Sears store. It was almost winter and already dark outside, and the place had no lights on at all, meaning my only source of illumination came from the parking lot lights outside, and what little was still running on in the mall. It was very empty and very quiet too. I didn't want to believe that my family would just leave without me, and I must have thought they'd come looking for me, or someone knew where I was. Maybe the reason I stayed in the tumbler for so long was simple kid logic. I was expecting someone else to find me and let me know when it was time to go. I just had to stay put and safe from my tormentors. until the adults came to save me. I ran up to the door to the parking lot, hoping it would open, and I'd see the van running outside, with Mom and Dad ready to open the sliding passenger door for me and ask, "What took you so long?" But the lot was as vacant as the store. You could mistakenly think that the mall hadn't been visited in years, the way the landscape once filled with vehicles appeared. The doors were also locked, to no surprise. Not that I was stupid enough to venture out into the cold, only dumb enough to hide in the washing machine. It occurred to me early on that the mall was going to be closed until Friday, so I might have taken that to mean that absolutely no one would enter the building before then. Then the realization upset me, and chances are I shed a few tears, but I would have also been brave and try to focus and reach out to reason. I knew my aunt and uncle's home phone number. All I needed to do was find a phone, and I could get a quarter from the fountain for a payphone if I needed to. And I knew that there should be plenty of phones around the store too. Not that I would have even known what it meant to get an outside line on any of them, but calling was a moot point anyway. I did locate some phones as I explored the back offices, and found the one at the customer service desk, but nothing but a dial tone. Figured I was doing something wrong or the store shut them off at night. I left the relative safety of Sears to try and make my way to a payphone, whereas the store felt somewhat safe despite being a left-behind 7-year-old in the dark. Even today, the idea of walking around an empty mall at night freaks me out. I may not fully get the liminal space craze, but there's something universally unnerving about exploring some place typically full of people that you're not ever supposed to see after closing. The Sears wasn't blocked off by a rolling shutter. I'd have no hope of getting open. Like most of the stores, all that kept me inside was a pair of latches on the top and bottom glass door. I found a stepladder so I could reach the upper lock and got out in a minute. Scared and shaky, yes, but rather proud of my handling of the situation so far. Ready to find a payphone. Being an hour from the house meant rescue would take time, but just hearing a parent's voice would have been enough for my spirits at the moment. The mall itself was better lit than Sears, though not by much. It was a dark and cloudy evening, so the skylights were pitch black, but what was coming from the vending machines and any storefront signage that had a backlight helped me enough to navigate. While the darkness was bad enough, it was the silence that really got to me. Most people probably feel that the spiraling indoor shopping plaza playing crappy music at night would only add to the creepiness, but I might have found it rather comforting in comparison. My sneakers squeaked against the tile. I kept otherwise quiet and on the watch all around me. My eyes peeled on the shadows as if I expected a monster to jump out at any moment. It didn't take long to find a couple payphones, but they didn't have dial tones either. That must have dampened my outlook. I think I shrunk down against the wall and had another good cry. At some point, I noticed a warm flickering light down the hall towards the atrium. Was the mall on fire? It would have been a frightening discovery at first, like something out of a strange nightmare, but I didn't see any smoke or hear any alarms go off. And there could have been someone down there, some member of staff who was either fighting the flame or had ignited them. I wiped away my tears and approached out of curiosity. And as I turned the corner, I saw the first of that night's bizarre scenes. Dozens of candles lined the inactive fountain, and there was a thin sheen of some kind of dark liquid on the water that had an acidic odor. The image of a mural now stands out vividly in my mind. The dancing candlelight on the face of the colonists and the natives, ceding land to them. There was something old world about it, like part of the past was lingering in this place. That was when the chanting reached my ears. It was distant, but I could tell it was coming from real people. And there was only one more way to go, towards Dillard's, the other end of the V-shaped mall. I looked around the next corner, and under a large skylight were a number of figures sitting on the floor and surrounded by 4 load-bearing pillars and countless candles. People were in silhouette and difficult to see, but there were people. Call me judgmental, but I wasn't naive enough to believe that group chanting in candlelight near a polluted fountain in the mall at night would offer any hope to a child who may have already seen too much. Even so, I kept still and stuck to the shadows, watching from a distance for a short while. My young mind must have no idea what to make of the sight. Was this something adults typically got together and did after work? Were they practicing some kind of holiday performance? It sounded ridiculous to even consider those things now. Of course, but when you're a kid whose worldly experiences are limited, every new discovery can mystify no matter how mundane. I should mention how well I can remember this part. I've always been able to, but I just couldn't recognize it as something that really happened. I'll explain why later, but I figured I should preface the clarity I have at this moment. Over the course of several minutes, I had snuck closer to the group, only stopping and hiding behind a fake plant once I could make out their strange chanting. It was harmony among the 7 people, and oddly rhythmic. If not muffled by their masks, their mantra was paced like breathing, in and out, and muttered in a low drone, and it only consists of 2 words that I'd never heard before. Words I knew didn't belong to the English language. I could best translate the pronunciation as Uwajade and followed by Handouini. The candlelight was too dim to make out their clothing at first, but the animal masks were much easier to discern. There was a rat, a raccoon, and some bird of prey like an eagle or a hawk, a fox, a deer, and a snake. The person leading the incantation wore a pig mask, and if everyone was positioned on a clock, he would have been at midnight, with the others at 3, 4, and 5, and one on 7 and one on 8, and the other one on 9. There was no holding of hands, no movement or swaying. It was like they were in a meditative trance, saying those 2 words without thought or end. There was a source of light in the middle of the group that I couldn't make out yet, as 3 people blocked my view. It cast a scarlet glow and it stretched their shadows across the mall tile. I realized as I watched this strange spectacle that I actually might have had some frame of reference for what I was seeing. Surrounding 1990 was the height of America's satanic panic, which in essence was a baseless concern among religious communities that Satanism and other forms of pagan worship were prevalent in all walks of life across the country. In other words, a few people were convinced that their neighbors could be trying to summon demons in suburbia. My parents weren't religious, and I never went to church growing up, so I could only objectively say it was nothing more than a form of mass hysteria. Fun fact, it was. I'm leaving this in the video. I want you guys to know that is factual. Back then, I wouldn't have been so sure what it all meant. The panic only began something I'd hear about from my classmates at school, and occasional reports on the nightly news. But I did at least have some idea of what such a ritual might look like. It didn't matter whether or not I believed in any of it. If the people chanting in the circle truly did, then who knows what they might have been capable of doing. No matter how misguided, too much faith and conviction in any belief can give people the power to do and justify anything. Having convinced myself that they were trying to open a portal to the place where bad guys went, I didn't want to take a chance on any of that stuff being real, so I started backing off, deciding to avoid the area entirely. I mean, think about seeing something this messed up as the worldly weary adult, then imagine seeing it as a child. It's surreal, inexplainable, nightmarish, the type of thing that would probably never leave your mind. I'm surprised I stayed and observed as long as I did. But looking back at it, it may have been because something was pulling me in, tugging at me from a distance, trying to whisper in my ear. Only it was too far away, so its touch was too subtle to quite reach me. I was about to leave until I heard a familiar sound, the ring of a phone. I hadn't seen it until the pig man got up and went over to it. But there was a phone on the floor next to the ritual site. My eyes had adjusted to the dark enough to see the following long cable connected to it, which ran from some place further down the hall. I couldn't see from my position. As the pig man went to answer it, I got a look at his clothes. He was wearing a business suit of all things, and it was stained in deep red. Yes, he said into the receiver in a plain voice, as if he were talking to a regular person on a normal day. Yes, we're ready. Understood. We will begin right away. And good weekend to you as well. Goodbye. He hung up, and his other animal friends waited patiently as he walked down the hall. I couldn't take my eyes off the phone, perhaps the only one in the mall that was working. There was no way I'd ever be able to make myself sneak over to it, but I knew if I could follow the cord, I might be able to find another usable phone near where the other one was plugged in. The pigman returned after a few seconds, pulling over a trolley cart, like the kind used by ice cream vendors around the mall during the day. And this is where things got unexpectedly disgusting and perverse. He opened the sliding metal lid of the cart and pulled out an animal carcass. I think it was, I suppose appropriately, a pig, although its head was missing. And no, he thankfully wasn't wearing it. It was easy enough to tell what he had adored was a simple rubber mask. Not that it made any of what I was seeing any less bizarre. The carcass had already been slashed multiple times, with deep wounds going across the body that were still leaking blood, as if it was just another typical Wednesday for them. He nonchalantly stabbed the pig with a large knife to create another exit for more blood to flow from, and dangled the carcass over the ritual site. He also shook it around, making the crimson liquid splash across the tile. The other people just kept sitting there throughout, not even reacting. I'm sure they were hit by blood droplets, but didn't care. When the pig was thoroughly drained, he chucked it offside, then returned to the cart and pulled off an object that had been perched atop the retractable umbrella pole, and when he brought it into the light, I could see that it was a cow skull with horns intact. It was bleached, dusty, and cracked. It had been around for a while. The pig man returned to a spot and held it over his head, and chanted, "Fresh blood, old bone, binding our cycle of life with those that have come before. We ask that you hear us once more. This sacred, ancient land, we respect your bounty. We know our desires to be worldly and petty, small and meaningless in the eyes of the timeless earth around us. We humbly beg your forgiveness for our sins, for forsaking and abusing nature, and for the death and destruction brought by our forefathers. May the old spirits of those who truly tended to and respected this land only know paradise. They did not deserve our wrath against them, and surely their use of great power was modest and just. But we live in the modern world. We know it to be shallow, frivolous place, and yet the livelihoods are as always at stake. Failure of crop, famine, and pestilence may no longer be grave concern, but we still feel failure and destruction, the loss of opportunity. If we do not succeed, then someone else, even worse than us, and it will be as if we were never here." The pig man lowered his arms and cradled the cow skull. It could be that his arms were just tired, and he wasn't done yet with his diatribe and request to what must have been some unseen personal god. Capitalism has swept across this land and carries with it many sins, but our greed is not in excess. For all of its faults, the industrialized world begins benefits to our health and standards of living, but it requires constant economic growth, so we ask that you bless us with one more year of generous gifts. We are the caretakers of a structure that has brought income to many and joy to many more. We are proud to remain independent and not under the thumb of corporate tyranny. Yet, and God knows we've tried, our slow decline continues. Were it not for your charity, our time here would have already come to an end. We heartily ask that you renew and revitalize our beloved enterprise again, allowing it to persist, and many our days remain full of purpose for as long as you see fit. We cannot be abandoned or forgotten, or bow to those who would dispose of us for profit. Look into our history. See, we are cherished by the masses. And now, my friends, let us pray. With that said, he set the cow in the middle of the circle and began chanting, resumed louder and more forceful this time. Yahweh de Hawine, Yahweh de Hawine. They continued like this and remained still, like they were meditating. I thought that their eyes must have been closed. Mantra was boisterous enough to hide any sounds it might make. It was the right time to get moving, to follow the phone cord and maybe earn a chance to make a call. I know you're probably wondering just how I remembered all of this so well. I have actually more than memorized the pigman's words. They've been a part of me for decades, lingering and repeating in my dreams and thoughts. While I had, until recently, forgotten the context of that ritual, what came before and after, the scene has presented in my mind since I first watched it. It was an unnatural memory, one that could have eventually driven me crazy if I didn't get my answers. Why did I have so many nightmares about it? Why would I think about the pigman's speech while trying to focus on schoolwork or during sleepovers with friends? Or while busy with every other aspect of growing up? The ritual didn't feel like something that had really happened, so I could never explain it to myself, just where it was coming from, or what was the meaning of it. I've written those words on compost book journals, and in text files on computers many times over the years, just to test my memory. I've gotten them exactly the same each attempt. It's like they're burned into my head, no less likely to decay than ancient language inscribed on stone tablets. The whole thing behind all of this, it's our memory. It wants me to survive through them, to persist and rebuild. The ritual is its personal belief, how you view the process, make it out of. It doesn't care. As long as it exists in some form, you can give it power. It will bend reality for you and fulfill the closest things this world has to a wish. But the cost? Well, I'm not sure yet what it is. I don't know if it has a name, or even if it's aware of what it is, nor how old this thing is, or who created the first one. I'm talking about the totem, an object bound to this land, whether it can be called cursed or hallowed. I didn't see it the first time I walked past it. Not that I can remember. Maybe I did. But in my memories, it's nothing more than a burning bright light, like a hole in a celluloid that projector shines through. As I snuck around the 7 worshippers, if that's what they could be called, I got my first real look at the ritual site. Other than the cow skull and the fresh pig blood splatters, I could see that there had been a circle on the ground also made of blood, smeared messily across the tile. Dotting that circle were 7 smaller halos, for participants to sit within. In the center of it was the totem. Though, as I stated, I only remember this moment as a bright flare, a burning ball of fire, too luminous for the mind to imagine or process. It was there. My eyes must have seen its true form, but I simply cannot picture that form in this instant. I hurried around the corner and began to make some distance from the animal masked people. Feeling safer with every step, I followed the cord connected to the red phone on the floor into a side hallway, and then to the mall security room, which was empty. It was a small place, little more than a couple of desks on an array of black and white TV screens. They must have connected the cameras across the building, but all of the monitors went off. I don't think the CCTV system was active during the ritual, ensuring there was no recording of it. The very long phone cord was plugged into a jack by one of the desks, and the other desk had a phone resting atop, just waiting to be used. I knew it had to be working, so I reached out to check for a dial tone, but it rang. I froze. I wasn't expecting it to ring, and I was too scared to answer. What if it was the same person that the pigman had talked to? Or maybe if it was someone who could help me. In my panicked state, I just wasn't sure what to do. I hesitated and stood in place too long. By the third ring, I could hear approaching footsteps of someone who must have been wearing boots. I hid under the desk, making myself as small as I could. The light in the room was positioned in a way so that it cast the man's shadow on the nearby wall. Between the phone's rings, I could hear his muffled breathing from under his mask. He sounded agitated, perhaps offended by the interruption. My heart beating out of my chest, I remained under there, quiet and frozen, as he stood just behind me on the other side of the desk. I believed he was waiting for the phone to stop ringing, but after about a dozen or so rings, I could see his shadow bring up his mask and then grab the receiver. "Sleepy Pine Security," he answered, in that kind of tone I remember my parents using whenever I did something bad. Yet they were trying really hard not to yell at us. I'm paraphrasing, but he went on to say something like, "Lost child. No, no one's here. Yes, I'm looking at the cameras right now. You don't need to get the police involved. Your kid isn't here. Goodbye. Don't call back." He slammed the phone down. I could hear him mutter in frustration, "Damn it." Despite my terror, I still couldn't comprehend that it was one of my parents that just called. They knew I was missing, and it was just a matter of time until either they or the police showed up. I suppose it was a good thing I didn't pick up the phone, or I likely would have been caught. The pigman slid his mask back down and turned to leave. As I planned to return the call as soon as he was gone, that instant I began to move. However, the phone rang again. I retreated back under the desk only seconds before the pigman came stomping back. He ripped the phone right off the cord and threw it at the wall with such force that I could hear the plastic casing shattering on impact. His rage only made me more scared. Getting caught in the slightest inconvenience, getting in the way of his ritual, was likely hearsay. Worse, he knew there was a child somewhere in the building, a helpless interloper. He and the others would now keep an eye out for me. Recognizing this, I must have stayed under that desk for a decent length of time before mustering the courage to get up and leave the room. The only phone I could easily get to, destroyed, but also armed with the knowledge that help was on its way, I saw the best opportunity as just trying to get out of the building. Sleepy Pines was a central location and served many towns, and yet it was still away from the interstate and gas station near it. The place was in the middle of nowhere, and there were no other businesses I could run to. Even so, by then I was ready to take my chances waiting or hiding outside. The emergency doors out the hall were also a no-go, however. Looking back, I think the mall could be completely locked down by design. Maybe it was important for the ritual, noting that nothing could get in or out, or it could be that they were keeping something else inside. I hadn't mentioned this yet, but ever since getting out of the washing machine that night, I'd felt like I was being watched, as if eyes were on me the moment I had stepped into the darkness of the Sears stores. I wonder if I had just stayed under the tumbler, would I have been safe? I'm not saying that the mall itself was alive exactly, but I believe there was some kind of presence in there that night, all around, invasive, lingering in the shadows, and in every corner where light couldn't reach. The feeling was never stronger than when I stepped into the utility corridor, its entrance being right by the useless emergency exit. It was cold in a dirty place, left unheated, nothing but gray concrete, wiring, air ducts, old equipment, and remnants of a store that had closed years before. The long stretch of the hallway was like the building's unseen museum. Sale signs going out of business banners, cardboard stands, broken shelving units. I'm not sure what the places that no shopper typically sees are like in your typical mall, but here, it was as if the management never threw away anything. It was a mess, but at least the flickering fluorescent lights that lined up the ceiling kept it from being dark. I'm guessing they were rarely turned off. Never got a chance to look for some seldom used doorway. Back there though, I didn't even take a step past the entrance. The presence I had felt was almost overwhelming from my spot. At the end of the hallway, any kid would have been scared to navigate in normal times, and for one reason in particular, the corridor was breathing. The night still gets worse. The night's still getting worse, but I'm confident that just being in that hall was the main reason my mind locked me out of the surreal memories in the first place. Like the chanting under the skylight, the breathing was rhythmic and natural. In and out, as if it were staring at a huge monster's throat. It was frigid, too, but impossible to mistake for a draft. Wind pulled trash and loose objects away from me, and then blew them back several seconds later, and yet there was no sound other than the skittering small debris affected by the current. No rummaging, no snoring, only dead, silent air. I don't remember how long I stood there, debating whether it was safer to turn back or actually proceed into the hallway. Maybe only seconds, but I'm sure it felt longer. My decision was made for me when I suddenly saw a rapid approaching darkness from the other end. Its movements were swift and never stopping. It wasn't like the fluorescent lights were taking turns shutting off. There was an abyssal blackness coming right for me at the speed of a freight train, and it engulfed everything it swept over. I think it may have even generated a shockwave of air, hitting with enough force to push me forward just after I turned around to flee from whatever entity was threatening to swallow me. I threw my body against the door, and I had stepped through only moments ago before the darkness could reach me. Fell to the floor, stumbled about, and took off in the opposite direction as fast as I could go. Keeping it in was all impossible. I could recall screaming as I ran away with no destination in mind. I threw my body against the door I stepped through only moments ago before the darkness could reach me. Fell to the floor, stumbled about, and took off in the opposite direction as fast as I could go. Keeping it all was impossible, and I could recall screaming as I ran away with no destination in mind. It didn't matter that my panic had given myself away, because the pigman was already on the lookout for a child. He grabbed the back of my jacket the instant I passed by the corner where he'd been waiting. He was tall and strong. I think he must have picked me up with one arm by just the collar of my outerwear, brought me back to his mask, and I could see nothing but black through the rubbery pig's eyes. Well, he muttered in a guttural growl, "What brings you to Sleepy Pines tonight, young lady?" But to hold and carry me with a single arm over his shoulder like he did the pig carcass. He took me towards the ritual site. My survival instincts kicked in, remembering what my parents taught me to do if I should ever be grabbed by a stranger. I started thrashing and yelling in his grip. Not that it did anything good against such a brute. I need to take a break there. I don't feel prepared to move on to what happened after that. It'll take another round of stealing my nerves to revisit the next part. I do want to keep writing these while these memories are fresh, so I think I'll spend the next couple of nights doing little research and getting down some objective facts. Pardon the brief interlude. During the existence from 1973 to 2008, Sleepy Pines only had two owners, the first of which also helped design the building. The second owner was brought in to oversee the revival attempt starting in 1991, but didn't quite succeed and ended up closing the shop less than 2 decades later. As far as I can tell, he was a typical businessman of little importance, and his only noteworthy accomplishment was getting a good deal for the sale of the land. So let's talk about Pierce Colester, the first owner. I did what I could on digging up information about him before writing the story, but it's no easy task. Whether the world simply ignored him as much as an owner of a small mall could be ignored, his legacy has been made enigmatic. But the first few things we do know. He was born in 1942, appeared to be quite tall compared to others, and what few photographs of him existed. And he was once a college professor in the Northwest of all things, teaching a class on anthropology studies as they pertain to native populations that once thrived in the area, but that only lasted for a short while, or as sometime around 1970 he inexplicably came into a lot of money, quit his job, and bought a large trace of wooded lands not far from the freshly laid interstate road. His business dealings were seen as shady, his construction contracts also seeming lost to time, but all that was brushed aside by the local government when Sleepy Pines opened in 1973 and brought a cash flow into the area that was little more than farmland and abandoned steel mills. Steel mills. I'm certain I met him that night because he suddenly disappeared in 1990, and a new owner had to be found who wasn't as successful with running the place. The mall's reputation for being clean and safe was hit hard, and fell into despair, vendors evaporated, and its glory days became a memory. In other words, I was there at the moment its slow death spiral started. There was something else notable about Sleepy Pines that I gathered from a series of small articles over the years written about the place. Stories and observations that never gained wider traction yet persisted while Mr. Pierce was in charge. Excluding the workers who ran both corporate stores and smaller independent outlets, the mall had been roughly knowingly understaffed during his tenure. It did function as any other decent mall, only with far fewer people at the helm than usual, to the point where it was noticeable to anyone looking. It managed to thrive in the early days, even so, and that small overhead must have bolstered monetary success of Sleepy Pines. I love the name of this mall. And put more money right in Mr. Pierce's pocket. He only ever commented directly on the matter once, and never in a written interview. After contracting a few people I grew up with and who still live in the area, one of them managed to uncover an old videotape with recordings of local news broadcasts for the closest city to the mall. It so happens that Mr. Pierce was interviewed in 1988, right in the atrium itself, and in front of the mural. He had made one of the rare public appearances for what was little more than a fluff piece celebrating the mall's 15th anniversary, and the segment was less than 2 minutes long. Hearing him speak was what really confirmed to me his identity. He was standoffish, and his answers were to the point, if not a little defensive. I won't transcribe the whole thing, but here's the response worth mentioning. He was asked 3 questions. The first, he explained the mall's success on keeping a small but dedicated and professional staff on hand at times. To them, the place was more than just their livelihoods, it was a sanctuary. His words, not mine. Even the reporter seemed a little taken aback by the degree of, perhaps thinking he went a little too far. He visibly tries to lighten up a little, and emphasizes that he just wants to turn the mall and the work around it into an art form, something to take pride in, like the Italians and the Japanese do. Keep in mind, this was a middling shopping center in a low to middle class rural area. He definitely thinks too highly of himself, and it's clear he isn't much for socializing. Replying to a follow-up question on why he hired so few people, he claims things like efficiency and forming a tight-knit family. I think he just wanted to save money and have the right number of workers that he felt he could control, either keeping them devoted to his cause or leaving their numbers small so they wouldn't consider rebelling or unionizing against him. After some banter back and forth, complaints from the reporter about the pristine nature of the place, she asks her last question about the mural, and the camera pans over to it. Basking in the daylight from the window above, and because of the low-res video, it's like the figures watching several children passing by with ice cream cones in their hands. Every mall needs a centerpiece, something that defines and speaks for it. Mr. Pierce says, I visited many across the country and seen things from elephant sculptures to meaning displays whipped by a commercial artist. I had a mural commissioned to pay homage to the people that were here first. It allows us to look back on them and them us from distant past, and from anyone that studies the brushstrokes closely enough, they will find little secrets. Depiction of folk stories and forest creatures. I cannot give away the name of its two creators. One did the backdrop, the other did simplistic figures, but suffice to say, they both made a modern masterpiece. All this art talk goes over the reporter's head, and she concludes the interview with a toothy grin, wishing Mr. Pierce luck in the next holiday shopping season. Himself an artist and backhanded wit, he smiles wearily and suggests that she might wish to check out the sale Poetry Barn. She cheerfully closes out, and we return to the local newsroom to learn other trivial matters. I do miss the simplicity of that time. It's hard to believe that just a couple years later that man was covered in blood, wearing a pig mask, and returning to what was pretty much a cult ritual in his mall, with me in tow, kicking and screaming. I can really only owe my survival to a rift among his workers. Some of them didn't lose their humanity quite yet, seeing as their boss dragged over a small girl to sacrifice was a step too far for them on first sight. Since I was able to regain near their holy object, I can revisit my recurring nightmare realm, where my memories are crystal clear. I was finally close enough to the site to see the others, and I took their appearances despite being terrified. While they never looked off in their animal masks, the rest of their clothing was also business attire. I recognized two of the uniforms, that of the custodian and the head of security, both of whom I had seen earlier that day. There were two other men in suits, and two women as well. I know I'll never identify. For some reason, when I was brought close enough to the object in the middle of the circle, I could see it, or more accurately, I could remember seeing it from then on. It doesn't seem to burn a hole in my memory. The totem radiates strange energy, its structure glowing and containing something exotic and prejudiced. There was a red orb floating inside it, giving off waves of heat, like a road on a hot summer day. I don't think its color actually had to do anything with blood, but rather it was just how these delusional people perceived it. Nor do I think they dug it up. It was too clean and intact for some ancient lost relic found in the area. I believe they built it. I was able to watch Mike and Gina's video after getting in touch with the person who discovered their camera files and is keeping them otherwise private, making me one of the few who has watched those mall exploration clips. This was definitely not the same totem that briefly appears in the video. Its composition, size, and material are totally different, whereas the object they stumbled upon was tall and looked like a wood carving. This 1990 iteration of the supernatural device was made of bone and bound by leather and wood, and in a shape similar to an antique hourglass, with the bone twisting around to form a cage of some sort that kept the crimson sphere inside. Thankfully, I doubt it was made of human bones. They looked like they had come from a large animal, and I don't think that people were macabre enough for that kind of defilement. Not yet, at least. Some of their arguments made their opposition to what was happening clear and gave me hope, but that night was already one of the most demonic things a child could ever experience. Other than Mr. Pierce, the pigman, I couldn't be sure of who spoke because of the mask, but the quarreling went something like this. Why is there a kid in the mall? Where did you find her? We have to stop everything at once. She isn't part of the process, but she's already seen too much. No, we can medicate her, knock her out. She'll think this was all a bad dream. Her parents must be on the way. Don't waste time debating, but you know it doesn't let anyone forget. This is true. Fierce tells his flock, as I continue to stare in awe and fear at this sacred object. And their family is looking for her, but isn't it obvious what we must do? This is a sign. The divine miracle is testing us, our devotion, bringing us this lost lamb. We know what has to be done. Sir, one of the women quietly replies shakily, when you use this language like that, it concerns me. The icon is remarkable, yes, but we need to remain rational and clear-headed. We agreed to this years ago. It would be dangerous to place such blind faith in this thing that we still don't have understanding. This remark angers Pierce, and he roars almost incoherently. That is exactly why the power has waned. You never truly believed in the icon. None of you did. Not like I do. How can you take this child's appearance in any other way than a presentiment? No, a holy sacrifice. We're never going to sacrifice a child, the other woman said. She and the custodian get to their feet. This is too much. When does it end? What's next? Do we put 2 kids under the knife next year, then double it every year after? If we must, Pierce rages on. Think of all the happy families, making memories, buying presents for their loved ones. We need that to persist. This is a small price to pay for success. Open your eyes. But he's only losing followers, and everyone but one of the main men in a fancy suit stands up to oppose him. I don't think its power has weakened, sir. The head of security replies harshly. I think that even it can't keep the tide back any longer. He's right, my friend. We can't fight where the market is going. The golden days are over for many businesses. Not just us. Let's calm down and talk civilly. There are other uses we can find for this object, and Sleepy Pines may still be able to sustain itself for years to come. Even without its help, the past isn't worth holding on to. Not at this price. None of you ever had faith in the blessed icon. If you had truly devoted yourselves to it, we would not even be here tonight. It was the last person still sitting on the floor. One of the men wearing a business suit and had hidden by a rat mask stood up. He took out a knife from the pig's corpse nearby and wiped off the blood on his sleeve. My faith is still strong, he grumbled in a harsh tone. Good, then show me, Pierce demanded, and turned with me in his grasp so that I could face the large butcher's tool. The man in the rat mask approached cautiously, like it meant nothing at all to drive a blade into a child's heart. If it meant another year in the black, but the others still wouldn't let it stand. They drew near. They recoiled when the rat man slashed the knife towards them, and said sternly, Get back! I have too much writing on this place. If you can't do it, I will. Ever since my mind opened and confirmed to me that the memories at the ritual site were real, I found myself wondering the most about the Rat Man, more so than Pierce. Who he was, what he had on the line, and why he was such a devoted follower. He may have disappeared too, I think they all did, but the others were just less newsworthy. Whatever his story, the group didn't hesitate a second time. As soon as he had let his guard down, they rushed both him and Pierce and wrestled me from their grip. From the floor, I heard them scuffle, maybe even fight in earnest. It had to have been just the tail end of a long, tumultuous relationship among them all, and I was merely a passerby in the night. Whatever their boiled over disagreements with one another, they were more important to the ritualist than me. I was only the trigger, and suddenly forgotten for the moment. I could just have gotten to my feet and snuck away, but I was worried I still might not make it out. The overwhelming presence in the building remained, and if it didn't catch me, then Pierce or the Rat Man would. The two of them were strong and fierce, and my brief glimpse of their struggle, I saw they were already close to overpowering the other five. My solution to everything was remarkably simple. If it had been when I was an adult, I might have overthought it or doubted my ability to do it. But easily, my impulsive solutions are what being a kid is all about. So I did the one thing that made sense to me throughout that night. I got up, went over to the totem, and crushed it with my foot. I ferociously stomped on it, repeatedly breaking the bones that compromised it with satisfactory snaps. Upon hearing those sounds and then seeing what I was doing, Pierce expressed his extreme disapproval by flying into another rage. He broke free from the others and came charging at me, but his anger was short-lived and quickly turned into something sort of physical or mental anguish. Once the totem was completely shattered, the floating red orb in its center turned black, melted into a liquid that oozed onto the tile, and then seemingly soaked in the tile. The substance had disappeared within a second. I think this caused the reaction in Mr. Pierce. He spasmed and started choking on a liquid, black fluid dripping from the pig's mask. Then he vomited up a torrent of that disgusting black gunk from the fountain. The others backed away from him. I'm guessing they didn't know what was happening either, but he was in obvious pain and suffering as his body tried to purge something. This was always where my repeated nightmares ended. With the totem destroyed, it no longer had a hold on my memories. The rest of the night became a blur again, although I remember the rest just as well as any other fuzzy childhood account. Pierce ran off, clutching his chest or stomach, and there's a chance that everyone else just stood around a moment longer, looking at each other around me as if wondering what now. It didn't last long since the mall was dark and the flashing red and blue lights had suddenly appeared from the other side of the nearest locked door, filled the halls, and scared them off. After they also disappeared from my life, I ran into the door feeling overwhelmed by panic and desperation to get out of that building. I'm not sure, but when I destroyed the totem, all the sleepy pines may have trembled. If it wasn't for me severing some otherworldly grip on the place, then perhaps it was just unseen but omnipresent entity I had felt since the start of that night. Either way, I had returned to the world of reason and everyday, normal adults doing their job. The police officer that had come to my rescue weren't able to get in touch with any mall staff, for reasons obvious to only me. So, after I ran to the door, they ended up breaking the glass to get me out of there. My parents were waiting near the van. We had a cheerful reunion. I got back into the vehicle myself on the way home. I only had bits and pieces of the last moments of the night, so it was likely I passed out as the adrenaline dissipated. They brought me straight to bed. I never told my family everything. They knew I had been trapped in a mall, alone at night for hours, and that there was more than enough to warrant some child therapy. After a few months or so, it must have shown good improvement because they no longer saw a reason to keep at it. So long as I didn't visit the mall again, I don't remember much from my session. But I don't think I ever told my therapist the full truth either. Who would believe it? What would it add? What would it add, if anything? I'd just be seen as delusional or confused. The resulting nightmares with reality. People in animal masks worshipping bones in a pig blood pool. While therapy taught me how to manage my emotions and not let past events control me, I mostly credit my recovery to my mind, quickly bearing the reality of what transpired. I can't explain how it did it so exactly, but it couldn't have something to do with the unbelievable things I saw. Part of me couldn't accept them as real, or maybe the totem can remove or rewrite memories to disguise its nature and make finding out what it is difficult. In my recurring flashbacks and dreams over decades that take place, the ritual site, the totem itself never actually appeared until recently. I'd forgotten its form. My theory is that the enigmatic object is both a lock and key. It can hide itself away from perception, but when I read Mike and Gina's story, and saw the video, the totem unlocked itself within my psyche, and freed other memories about the day as well. How it can do this is one more mystery as to its origins. I think any physical form it takes is tedious, only as strong as the person that creates it, but it knows how to linger and wait and to be made again. I can't even begin to assume anything about its powers or true purpose. I haven't seen any of the people at the ritual since then, and I never returned to the mall. We did visit my uncle's family for a couple more times, but I stayed at the house when the others paid a visit to Sleepy Pines. It may have been understandable for my parents that I shouldn't need to relive something so traumatic. A few years later, once both my cousins were adults with their own lives, my aunt and uncle moved from their small town. We had no reason to go back. Before I wrote this, I finally asked my mom about her perspective of the night, emphasizing that I remembered everything she thinks happened to me again. It reawakened old guilt, but I assured her that I had moved on and forgiven everyone for leaving me behind. Her answer gave me a clear understanding of how things went wrong, and I couldn't really blame my parents anymore, at least not fully. It was an accident, something that could happen to any large group of people at the end of a busy or chaotic day. It wasn't as basic as driving a van full of kids home, not noticing I was missing. There was actually some miscommunication between my parents and my aunt and my uncle about who was riding with who. Presents filled up both vehicles and meant passengers had to be split up. In the confusion, each driver must have thought I was in the other car. Specifics about which siblings and cousins were in which vehicle are lost to time. It's not that it really matters, however, things panned out. No one noticed I was missing until a few hours later, when it was time for bed. My parents rushed back to the mall after calling the police, and the response time was such that both parties arrived at the same moment, despite the difference in difference. Life moved on for us after that. The incident became another one of those childhood disasters that big families get used to. All my siblings have horror stories of their own as well, though none are as strange as mine. Not that I've indulged in any of theirs truthfully. I don't believe that the ritual site was ever discovered, or it was cleaned up in a hurry. No local newspaper had a story on any of it that I found in my extensive research. However, I did manage to track down the words that the rituals were chanting after repeating them in my head enough times to think about Pierce's reverence for local tribes. They were from a Seneca language used by the Iroquois people in the area. Iroquois, meaning the earth, and Haidwini, to breathe. To breathe, Yos Dazende, and Hodene. I'm not certain of the pronunciation, they probably weren't either. They probably didn't have to be. It's the belief that counts, that fed the totem. But if there truly is something special about the land up there, the breathing earth, I wouldn't be surprised it would track with what I felt and witnessed one night in November. The last thing I don't understand, to top off so many other things, is that I had to have been in that washing machine for at least several hours, since my mom swears that I didn't get into bed until midnight. There's no way that I would willingly stay in there for that long, so I must be missing time. I either fell asleep without knowing, totally spaced out for a while, or something else moved time. The moment the mall closed up, or something else that changed time. If the totem can screw around with space, it's not a stretch to say it could also play with time. The danger is great, but I also have a feeling it will eventually be remade again by someone with a different point of view than a few guilt-ridden capitalists in charge of a dying mall. And maybe then we'll get some answers, because I have none, only guesses, and an outsider story. Until then, I've recently found that sketching my own version of the totem on occasionally is strangely soothing. It makes me feel calm. I kinda like it, and think it best if created with some artistic like clay. But I'm always aware of what it might do if I fully realize. So don't worry about me. Everything is fine. And that wraps up Sleepy Pines. Next story will be called Dead Maw, and that is the main story. And then the one after that will be called Dead Pines, which takes place, I think, after Dead Maw. I hope you enjoyed, my friends.